The senior senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent. I appreciate Senator Cotton joining me on the floor and his work with Senator McConnell in this. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate, considering the following nominations en bloc, calendar numbers 660, 661, 663, 739, 740, 741, 742, numbers 804, 805, and number 859, that the Senate vote on the nomination in block without intervening action or debate. The motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that any statements related to the nominations be printed in the record, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
The senator from Arkansas.
Reserving the right to object, I want to say a few words about this matter. 2 months ago, I sent a letter to the Attorney General demanding answers about why the Department of Justice was hanging out to dry 4 deputy U.S. Marshals who had bravely defended the Portland courthouse against left-wing street militias in the summer of 2020. Those marshals are now facing civil litigation, but the department is refusing to defend them in court, putting them at risk of bankruptcy, and perhaps most alarming at all, it wouldn't even tell them why. Now, the department still hasn't provided definitive answers, and after I raised this alarm, they took another step and put the marshals on limited duty, telling them that after 20 months of active, unrestricted duty, they are now under investigation for the events in Portland. That's despite the fact that they received an award for their actions in Portland, received outstanding and excellent performance evaluations for 2020, and were again deployed to some of the most dangerous, high-risk missions that our law enforcement officers can undertake. So, call me crazy, but I have to say this seems like a case of potential retaliation. But it does, in a way, give the marshals the information we were seeking and help them understand their status. I also understand that at least one marshal has filed a complaint for retaliation against Vanita Gupta, the Assistant Attorney General. So the facts will come out one way or another, and my message to the Department of Justice today is this: you will be held accountable for your actions against these law enforcement officers if they are inappropriate or even unlawful. And if not this year, it'll happen next year, because I also want to add that yesterday I and several of my colleagues, including the Judiciary Committee's ranking member, Senator Grassley, and the former Judiciary Committee Chairman, Senator Graham, sent a letter to the Department about this investigation. We intend to get to the bottom of it, and we're committed to an oversight investigation in the 118th Congress if one doesn't occur in this Congress. I've also spoken to our Republican colleagues on the House Judiciary Committee, who have today issued a request to the Department of Justice to preserve documents in this matter. So now that I'm confident the Department will receive the oversight that it deserves in this matter, I will no longer object to these nominees. Therefore, given these developments in this matter, I will withdraw my objection to the confirmation of today's nominees.
President.
Without objection.
Madam President, I know of no future debate on this.
Is there further debate? If not, the question is on the nominees en bloc. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The nominations are confirmed en bloc.
Madam President.
The senior senator from Ohio.
I thank Senator Cotton for working together on this. These nominations are very important to our states. I heard Senator McConnell earlier talking about crime on the streets, and getting these people in place is really important. It's been 473 days since the 6 million people of the Northern District of Ohio last had a permanent U.S. attorney. The pandemic's caused an alarming rise in violent crime, especially gun crimes. The Northern District's no exception. The U.S. Attorney's Office has experienced its highest caseload in 30 years, filing a record 846 indictments in 2021. Even before the pandemic, the district had a staggering caseload. Last year, there were 170 homicides in the city I live in, the city of Cleveland, another 30-year record, not to mention a surge in carjackings. filling this important law enforcement position to keep our community safe is essential. I hear from police officers in desperate need of help. They need more resources, whether it's bulletproof vests to support local law enforcement operations, training to engage with those they serve, or getting U.S. Marshals and U.S. Attorneys on the job. And today with Senator Cotton, we're able to do that. We had an extremely qualified nominee ready and eager to serve. Marissa Darden is a seasoned prosecutor with extensive experience as a lead attorney in both criminal and civil cases. No one has any objections to her. No one has any doubt about her accomplishments and capacity to excel in this job. She was Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Northern District, recognized for her work on several cases, complex legal cases. She received the National High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Award for Outstanding Opioid Investigative Effort. She's received the award for Outstanding Investigative Effort, a different one in 2019. Significant management experience, a record of strong leadership. Federal Judge Benita Pearson said, "You can be assured Ms. Darden will fiercely enforce the law while trusting all, attorneys, staff, the accused, and the community, by treating all with respect and appropriate sensitivity." Former acting U.S. Attorney Justin Herdman, a Republican, the last confirmed U.S. Attorney in the Northern District, described her as an attorney of outstanding ability and unquestioned integrity. First Assistant Federal Public Defender Jacqueline Johnson wrote her first recommendation for a U.S. Attorney in 38 years of practice. Imagine that. Says she possesses the intellect, vision, temperament, and judgment needed to lead this office. DEA Special Agent in Charge Keith Martin echoed those comments, saying she is one of the best he's encountered. It's because of these qualifications Senator Portman has joined me in supporting Ms. Darden's nomination. Her confirmation would be historic, making her the first African-American woman to serve as a U.S. district, to serve as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio. Today, we come together to get qualified and talented law enforcement professionals on the job. I thank Senator Cotton for his cooperation on this, and I thank the presiding officer, Senator Baldwin, for her work. I yield the floor.
Madam President,
Senator from Arkansas.
I ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to complete my remarks before the scheduled vote at 3:30.
Without objection.
200 years ago today, one of our nation's greatest heroes was born. Ulysses S. Grant rose from humble beginnings to stand next to Lincoln and Washington as one of America's indispensable men. This great defender of America won our bloodiest war, crushed the darkest forces of disunion, bandaged our deepest national wounds, and bridged the greatest political divides. He was an unshakable pillar of strength upon which this nation's future rested time and again. Virtually no one foresaw Grant's rise to greatness before the Civil War. Although he had graduated from West Point and distinguished himself as a soldier in the Mexican-American War, he had later stumbled from one failure to another in business. In 1861, Grant was a man bent by humiliation and ridicule, but unbroken. After the Confederates attacked Fort Sumner, Grant rose from his knees as destiny called. He redonned his uniform, and he marched into the history books. For the first 3 years of the Civil War, Grant fought on the Western Front, winning several of the Union's early victories while commanders in the East dithered. After Grant's first great victory, his Confederate counterparts sued for peace and asked what terms he would give them. Grant firmly responded that he would accept no terms except an unconditional and immediate surrender. This earned him the nickname Unconditional Surrender Grant and resulted in the largest capture of enemy troops in the history of the Western Hemisphere up to that time. Grant waged a relentless form of warfare. He knew that, in his words, the art of war is simple enough. Find out where your enemy is, get at him as soon as you can, strike him as hard as you can and as often as you can, and keep on moving. Grant's warrior spirit famously moved President Lincoln to declare, "I cannot spare this man. He fights." When Grant's enemies spread the rumor that he was an alcoholic and should be dismissed, Lincoln wryly responded that if he could find out what brand of whiskey Grant drank, he would send a barrel of it to all the other commanders. Grant's famous determination and grit were on full display during the brutal Battle of Shiloh, one of the bloodiest scenes of the Civil War. In the first day of fighting, Grant's army was mauled by Confederate forces under the command of Alfred Sidney Johnston, the Confederacy's most competent general at the time. William Tecumseh Sherman approached Grant that rainy night beneath a great oak tree, and he said, "Well, Grant, we've had the devil's own day, haven't we?" Grant replied between puffs of his ubiquitous cigar, "Yes, lick 'em tomorrow, though." He made good on this promise, threw back the Confederate forces, and won the carnage-filled battle. Sidney Johnston was killed in the fighting, and Confederate President Jefferson Davis later wrote that it was the turning point of our fate. This story remains so legendary in the Army today that it was commonplace for young officers in the Iraq War to conclude a hard day by borrowing from Grant. Lick 'em tomorrow. Grant continued his brilliant streak of victories, and on July 4th, 1863, the 87th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, he seized the fortress city of Vicksburg on the Mississippi, splitting the Confederacy in two and securing the Union's control of that mighty river. This was perhaps the greatest strategic victory of the war, and combined with the victory at Gettysburg the previous day, Grant's seizure of Vicksburg put the Union on the path to victory. Soon after Grant's decisive victory in the Battle of Chattanooga a few months later and capture of the supposedly impregnable heights of Missionary Ridge, Lincoln promoted him to the rank of lieutenant general, a position that no one had held since George Washington. A few days later, Lincoln also named him commander of Union forces. In his new command, Grant quickly turned eastward and confronted Robert E. Lee, a skilled tactician who had run circles around the Army of the Potomac for 2 years. Lee had spooked Union commanders for so long with his audacious battle plans, but not Grant. He said, "I am heartily tired of hearing about what Lee is going to do. Some of you always seem to think he is suddenly going to turn a double somersault and land in our rear and on both of our flanks at the same time. Go back to your command and try to think what we are going to do ourselves instead of what Lee is going to do." What Grant did was pursue Lee's army ruthlessly. As he marched into the Confederacy, he told a reporter, "If you see the president, tell him from me that whatever happens, there will be no turning back." In the weeks and months that followed, Grant attacked Lee's army again and again. Whether he won or not, Grant continued to advance deeper into the Confederacy. Grant's army fought in the burning forests of the wilderness and in the muddy trenches of Petersburg, experiencing extraordinary hardship, but never allowing Lee to regroup or reinvigorate his shrinking army. Less than a year after Grant began his overland campaign, the Union forces finally took the rebel capital of Richmond and broke the back of Confederate resistance. But U.S. Grant wasn't a great leader simply because he won the war. He was also great because he never lost sight of the first goal of the war: to reunite our shattered republic and restore what Lincoln had called the bonds of affection and the mystic cords of memory between Americans, North and South. Instead of humiliating Lee at Appomattox Courthouse, Grant offered him generous and honorable terms. Uncompromising in war, Grant was magnanimous in peace. He allowed Confederate officers to keep their sidearms and horses, did not demand Lee's sword, and promised not to prosecute rebels who laid down their arms. And as Lee departed the courthouse, Grant and his staff took off their hats in respect, a small act for the victors, but an extraordinary gesture to the defeated Confederates. Grant remained in the Army after Appomattox and continued to be a force for reconciliation and union as we stitched the stars back on the Old Glory. He didn't allow vengeance or anger to overwhelm prudence and wisdom. He even defended his former antagonist, Robert E. Lee, when President Andrew Johnson tried to renege on the terms of Grant's surrender agreement. When Johnson asked Grant, "When can these men be tried?" Grant replied, "Never, not unless they break their parole." He went so far as to tell his staff that "I will not stay in the Army if they break the pledges that I made." To Grant, his word was more important than any office. Thanks to his principled stand, Johnson backed down, and our nation avoided cycles of fruitless recrimination. At the same time, Grant also opposed Johnson's attempts to weaken Reconstruction and leave newly freed slaves exposed to inhumane treatment by vengeful former masters. Grant wanted neither excessive punishment nor excessive lenience. He wanted justice. Never a politician, Grant nevertheless acquiesced to popular demand and Republican entreaties to run for president in 1868 on the simple platform, "Let us have peace." Although his administration was imperfect, he fought to make good on this promise. He continued his work to bring the South back into the Union, restoring the rights of citizenship to over 150,000 former rebels and bringing Robert E. Lee to the White House as a symbol of reconciliation. Grant was also one of the greatest civil rights presidents in our nation's history, protecting freed slaves with laws and, when necessary, with force. When the first Ku Klux Klan terrorized the South, Grant ordered and empowered the Department of Justice and the Army to destroy it. And it was destroyed. Grant also healed the wounds that the Civil War had inflicted on our relationship with other nations. He settled a spiraling diplomatic crisis with Great Britain, provoked by Britain's decision to allow Confederate warships to be built in its ports, which went on to sink over 150 Union ships. After years of negotiation, the United States and Great Britain signed the Treaty of Washington, in which Great Britain formally apologized for its support for the Confederacy. The treaty further established an independent commission to assess damages inflicted on American commerce, that in turn ordered the British to pay our country over $15 million in damages. Grant also worked to settle other outstanding concerns in the treaty, paving the path to strong relations with Great Britain in the future. After his presidency, Grant sadly was conned in business ventures and fell deeply into debt. But even as he lay dying of cancer, he resolved to provide for his family. A week before his death, he completed his memoirs, a monumental literary achievement that continue to rank among the greatest ever written by any statesman. He also saved his family from debt, demonstrating one last time his indomitable will. Grant's funeral procession was the largest public demonstration in American history up to that point, with an estimated 1.5 million Americans in attendance. Frederick Douglass described Grant as a man too broad for prejudice, too humane to despise the humblest, too great to be small at any point. Douglass saw in Grant a protector for freed blacks, a friend to Indians, a brother to vanquished foes, and the savior for our imperiled nation. Yet progressive historians, a partisan press, and political enemies tarnished his record from the beginning. They have maligned him as a drunk and a butcher and a bumbling Western rube who is ill-suited to politics and probably corrupt at that. This is an ahistorical slander against a great American. As a deeply honest man and a Washington outsider, Grant perhaps wasn't always astute in spotting the unscrupulous swindlers and grifters attracted to our capital then as now. As president, he trusted some who didn't deserve that trust. His critics have exaggerated this guilelessness as a mortal sin, using the dishonesty of others to besmirch the record of a good and great man. But Douglass was right. Grant was a savior of this republic, and his few failings pale in comparison to his extraordinary achievements. And Grant's countrymen agreed, electing him twice by historic landslides. I have 4 photos hanging on the wall of my Senate office, photos of great statesmen who saved the West in our hour of crisis: Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan, and U.S. Grant. Throughout his life, U.S. Grant embodied a profound patriotism and selflessness that our nation should remember with awe and reverence. On this bicentenary of his birth, we should restore him to the pantheon of American heroes. First, among Americans. Madam President, I ask that the following remarks be entered in a separate portion of the record.
Without objection.
America's retreat from Afghanistan is a dark chapter for our country. We all remember the terrible scenes of desperate people clinging to the undersides of planes, of Taliban thugs beating innocent people, and most tragically of all, 13 flag-draped remains of brave American servicemen and women killed by an ISIS suicide bomb. We'll never forget those tragic events. They're grim reminders about the wages of weakness in Washington. But for every act of cowardice in Washington, for every act of evil by our enemies, there was an act of even greater bravery by our troops. As they always do, America's heroes redeem even the most forlorn missions through extraordinary action. I'd like to recognize one of our nation's heroes today. Navy Lieutenant Kristen Trindle is a member of my team in the Senate, where she does excellent work as my Deputy National Security Advisor after starting 6 years ago as my intern. I know that Lieutenant Trindle would be too humble to sit beside me today if she had any idea about what I'm going to say. But last year, she took a leave of absence from her Senate duties to deploy with the Navy Reserves. That deployment took her to Kabul, the eye of the storm. Lieutenant Trindle served as aide-de-camp to the general in charge of the evacuation. Their mission? To save as many Americans and Afghan allies as possible from the advancing Taliban. Lieutenant Trindle immediately proved her worth. For weeks, she was everywhere at once, creating on-the-fly methods to screen evacuees, coordinating evacuation efforts with counterparts from 4 countries, even helping orphans in the chaos of the Kabul airport. Those actions alone would have been worthy of commendation. But Lieutenant Trindle went above and beyond the call of duty. She volunteered to leave the relative safety of headquarters to lead a clandestine extraction team charged with finding and recovering Americans and Afghan allies. These dangerous rescue missions often required Lieutenant Trindle to go outside the wire to rescue highly vulnerable evacuees. She executed these missions in the dead of night, despite confirmed threats within sight of the enemy. Armed Taliban fighters were regularly within 100 yards of her position, beating and whipping civilians and menacing Americans. Lieutenant Trindle was unfazed by this danger. She carried on with her mission. Lieutenant Trindle and her team rescued an astounding 961 Americans and Afghan allies. That group included young kids, pregnant women, injured civilians, as well as high-ranking generals, helicopter pilots, translators, even an Afghan Supreme Court justice. Suffice it to say, many of those evacuees would be in jail or worse if Lieutenant Trindle and her team hadn't been there. At this time, my staff in Washington and Arkansas were working around the clock to evacuate American citizens. 2 of those Americans, a married couple, had visited Afghanistan for a wedding right before being trapped behind enemy lines. They made a harrowing journey through Taliban checkpoints to reach Kabul, where they got stuck for days, unable to get to the airport. They called my office's evacuation hotline for help, and we guided them as far as we could to the chaos of the airport gate, while we updated the coordination cell just beyond the barricade. Suddenly, Lieutenant Trindle appeared. You can find the cell phone videos of that nighttime rescue online. The Americans were screaming for help. Taliban fighters were savagely attacking civilians nearby. Then, over the roar and din of the crowd, came the calm, resolute voice of Lieutenant Trindle, saying, "She's with me." That couple is now home in America in safety. Lieutenant Trindle was with them. The nation has awarded Lieutenant Trindle the Bronze Star for her actions during the evacuation. I had the great honor of presenting that medal to her earlier today. As the official account of Lieutenant Trindle's actions note, she achieved 100% mission success in the face of unparalleled chaos. I would add that Lieutenant Trindle met unparalleled chaos with unparalleled courage. She deserves every bit of this high honor, and she deserves her country's sincere gratitude. Thank you very much, Kristen. I yield the floor.
President.
The senior senator from Ohio.
Thank you. I thank both her and Senator Cotton for their service to our country. And I know the vote is imminent, but I wanted to also echo his words on Ulysses S. Grant. History was not always kind to Grant as a general and as a president. With the publication of Ron Chernow's book on Grant, many of us and many historians and many citizens changed their views on Grant as a very important general, a very important president who did mostly the right things on race after the Civil War. And if he could have served another term or two, our country would look very different in terms of race and in terms of the structure, in terms of the black codes and Jim Crow and structural racism that we have seen in this country. I just wanted to call to the House and to the Senate's attention. Senator Blunt and I have a resolution. It may be hotwire, but might be hotline later today, I believe, in commendation, thanking President Grant, honoring the life and legacy of U.S. Grant and the commemoration of his 200th birthday. So I also wanted to add those comments, and I yield the floor. Can you put it in form, please? Madam President, I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Madam President,
The majority leader.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam President, we've just gotten some very good news, and that is that the Senate has confirmed the U.S. attorneys and U.S. marshals that had been blocked for quite a long time. It's a good thing that our Republican colleagues finally stopped their indefensible obstruction of qualified U.S. attorneys and marshals. These nominees are vital to keeping our community safe and secure, and they should never have been held up for leverage in partisan games. The nominees are vital to keeping our community safe and secure. After months of waiting, communities in Georgia and Ohio and Nevada and Minnesota and New Hampshire and other states are finally getting the security they need with confirmed U.S. attorneys. So I'm very glad that this has finally happened. It took too long, but now it's done. I yield the floor.
The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Executive Calendar Number 800, Sherilyn Peace Garnett of California, to be United States District Judge for the Central District of California, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the majority quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the nomination of Sherilyn Peace Garnett of California to be the United States District Judge for the Central District of California shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett.